Hello, I'm Dr. Jay Medenwalt, and this is my presentation from the 2024 conference for the Society of Personality and Social Psychology. I gave this presentation on the Enneagram at the Personality Science pre-conference, and some people have asked me to share it, so I wanted to make a video to get it out there and let people see it, but also to explain some of the statistics and things that are in the video. So let me go ahead and share the presentation and walk through it. Okay, so looking at the Enneagram, by this point, many of you probably know what the Enneagram is if you're watching this presentation. And it makes a lot of claims, but we can't test all of those, at least not in this short presentation, but I wanted to test just a few of them. And so some of those claims I'm going to test is whether there are 9 distinct personality types, like the Enneagram claims, and then test the arrangement of the Enneagram in the order of the types. And so how I did that is looking at the Enneagram figure over here, we can see that they're arranged in a specific order. And so because of that, we should see certain relationships between certain types. So if we look at type 9, we see type 9 is in the same triangle or triad as type 1s and 8s, and also can have type 1 and 8 as a wing. So 9 should be most highly correlated to or related to type 1s and 8s. And so based on the wings and the triads, and then these arrows, the directions of growth and strength, which are also connect to different types, we should see a higher correlation or a stronger relationship between those different types. And so that's what I wanted to do and look at in this presentation. So for analyses for the Enneagram, there's a couple different ways to do this. One would be called factor analysis, which this would be a method where we take all the different types of questions the Enneagram asks and basically try to reduce it down to as few categories as possible. Now, if the Enneagram is accurate, there should be 9 factors from this method because each of the different types is supposed to represent a different kind of personality trait or factor or like a driving motivational factor. And so there should be 9 different factors from doing this. A review from a few years ago looked at this and concluded that and found that in the research, people who had done this, there hadn't really shown 9 factors, but they suggested that this might not be the best analysis for testing the Enneagram types, and that latent profile analysis or latent class analysis might be a better method to do that. And they're partially right in that. The thing with the Enneagram is that the types are treated like separate factors. So factor analysis would be appropriate, but latent profile analysis or latent class analysis would be a supplemental or additional type of analysis that should also be used, but that's never been done before. And so I wanted to do that. And so what this is, this latent profile analysis does is it looks at all the different ways that people respond to the Enneagram questionnaires, and it statistically lumps them together into different groups. And so it's really the way, if you have a data set, to find if there's different types of people. And so this would be the best way to do it with the Enneagram. And again, factor analysis should also show 9 factors, but latent profile analysis would be even better way to do this, and they should agree with each other. All right, so looking at factor analysis, I was able to get 2 published data sets from previous researchers who have done this. One had 5,000 people, a little over 5,000. One had a little over 300 or almost 400 people. And so let's take a look at the results from the latent profile analysis to see what the results showed. There's a lot of numbers, a lot of data. And so really what we're looking at is this BIC number and this entropy number for now. Those are kind of the main ones to focus on. And so for BIC, what we want is lower values are better, or we want to look for a big drop in values, because when those when the drop off in those values gets smaller, that really suggests we're not getting much change in the explanatory power of the different types. And then this value of entropy is looking at how well defined the profiles or types are from each other. And ideally, we want to have a value above 0.8. And so looking at this data from this first data set, there's a little bit of subjectivity here. I think that 4 or 5 profiles is probably the best because that's where we see, even though this BIC number is still going down, this is really where it stops with the big drop off. So it's really small drop offs at this point. And then we see for entropy, we see kind of getting smaller and then hits that 0.75, gets smaller and then bigger again. So that would suggest maybe what's going on is a little bit of overfitting here. And so at that point, it means that we're explaining basically just this data set and not able to generalize to a larger population. And so there is a degree of subjectivity here. And so if we look at this and say, okay, I'm wrong, 4 or 5 is not the best, or none of these work, we want to look specifically at 9 types and compare it to 8 and 10. And what we see here again is the BIC number is still going down. So I would suggest 10 types is better than 9. And then entropy goes up from 9 to 10. So really 10 would be better than 9. 8 and 9 really equally good to each other. And so again, just to show 4 or 5 is probably better here. But if we want to force it and look at 9, really 10 would be better than 9. So it's hard to say that there are 9 Enneagram types from this data set. Turning to the other data set here, again, we see where we get this big drop off in BIC is at 3 types. And that's where entropy kind of, we see it go down and stay consistent, and then it goes back up, which again, that would be evidence of maybe overfitting. So with overfitting, you can think of if we've got 393 participants, entropy would be the highest if we had 393 different types, and that would be absurd and wouldn't make sense and wouldn't be interpretable and would be no point in doing this. And so we see again going up higher suggests overfitting, and it's not really valuable. So again, 3 types would be best from this analysis, from this data set. And again, if we look at 9 types and compare it to 8 or 10, we see 9 really isn't any better than the others. In fact, perhaps a little worse than 8 types, or even looking at the BIC number where it bottoms out would be right there at that 8 type. So again, 8 would be better than 9 in this case. So in either case, 9 types would not be the best from the latent profile analysis. But what happens when we do look at 9 types? So when you do a latent profile analysis, you can actually specify how many types or classes or profiles you want to come out from it. And so when we do that, if we do 9 types and we force it to create 9 types from the data set, this is essentially what we should see here. This is just the raw scores, and you can see each type. So type 1, there's a peak at type 1, type 2, there's a peak at type 2, type 3, there's a peak, right, and so on. So each type should have its highest score for that value. So what this means is type 1 scored highest on type 1 questions, type 2 scored highest on type 2 questions. And again, that's what we should expect to see, and how the latent profile analysis is dividing types would be based on these values and these peaks. And so that's what I wanted to investigate and see. And so when we look at that, the actual latent profile analysis, how it divided it based on the actual data, and we see it's not even close to that. See, basically we've got type 2s here are divided into 3 or 4 different types. So essentially what that means is type 4s, the people who, or sorry, type 2s, the people who are type 2s in this data set are actually scoring more differently from each other on all the other type scores than they are with each other, which is not what we would expect from the Enneagram, because the Enneagram specifies the way that all the different types are related to each other. We should see type 2s scoring more similar to each other than they are scoring on the other questions similar to other types. And so again, from this first data set, we see it's all over the map. And again, with the other data set, we see a similar thing. We see very different scores. We don't see a consistent pattern where each type has its own profile like we would expect if the Enneagram is consistently and accurately describing people based on types. So in summary, for this first analysis, 9 profiles are not the best model for explaining the Enneagram and how people score on Enneagram tests. And this would align with research with Big Five personality trait, which is the main kind of view or theory of personality that's used by researchers. It's the Big Five. And so the results from this align with that research and does not support the Enneagram. But when we do look at 9 profiles and see what comes out, it does not align with the Enneagram types. So the Enneagram does not really support its claims based on the data. But we have another level of analysis to do here. So the next one would look at the correlations between types to see more closely what this relationship is between types. So again, we see the structure of the Enneagram and how all these types are structured in relation to each other would suggest that certain types should have higher correlations. So type 9s, and just take a look at this. Types can be related to each other by sharing a triad. So in kind of here, we see these triangles here, the 3 different triangles. They can have wings for each other. And so 9 can have an 8 or a 1 wing. 1 can have a 9 or a 2 wing. 2 can have a 1 or a 3 wing, and so on. Right? And just the adjacent types can be wings. And then the arrows, directions of growth and strength, connect the types. And so basically, any type can be connected with another type based on 2 of these relationships, one of them or 0. And so where they're connected with 2 other types, so type 9 can have 1 and 9, or type 9 can have 1 and 8 as a wing, and they share a triad. So they're connected in 2 ways, wings and triads. So 9 should be most highly correlated with 1 and 8. And so looking at that all the way around for the different ones, and what I've done on these screens is categorized them, just to use color coding based on these data sets I use to look at the correlations. So if we walk through for type 1, for example, what we expect if the Enneagram is accurate is that type 1s should have the highest correlation with type 9 because they share the triad in the same body triad here, and 9 can be a wing of 1. Okay, and then 8, 7, 4, and 2 are all connected to type 1 in one way. So 8 shares a triad with 1, 7 and 4 are connected through these directions of growth and strength, and type 2 can be a wing. And so those should be the second highest correlations with type 1. And so I did from 8 published data sets on this that show the correlations between types. I did a meta-analysis, and I did 2 of these. I did a weighted and unweighted version. And the reason I did this is because one of the data sets had like 15,000 people, and so was overrepresented, which is if it's accurate and it's the best one, that's great. And we should give that more weight. But if it's not, if the data collection or analysis on it or the sample was not random, it's not really any better just because it's bigger number. And so I did both weighted and unweighted to try to give the Enneagram the best chance to be successful and to support its claims. And so when we look at the data, what we see here is with this unweighted, the correlations, which is the R stands, that's the symbol we use for correlations. We see the highest correlation for type 1 is with the type 8, not the 9. And the second highest would be 3, 4, 5, and 6. So really, we have 1 out of 5 that matches the hypothesis with the unweighted correlations. And then with the weighted, we see a different pattern. So again, this is giving more weight based on sample size. But again, we only see 1 out of 5 that actually matches the correlations. So going through this in all the other types, with type 2, we see it's really right, only 1 out of 4 for the weighted and unweighted correlations. For the type 3s, we see 0 out of 4, so it gets every prediction wrong. Type 4 correlations, it's 0 out of 4 for the unweighted, 2 out of 4 for weighted. So it's a little better here with the weighted data set. So it would suggest that those bigger data sets perhaps are a little bit more accurate, but this could also just be coincidence as well, and that those data sets aren't actually any better. For type 5s, we see 2 out of 4 for both weighted and unweighted. Type 6s, 1 out of 4 for both. Type 7s, 0 out of 4 for both. Type 8s actually does well. So it's got 4 out of 5 for both the weighted and unweighted, although there's a little bit difference we see here with this yellow also for type 4, but we'll give the Enneagram the benefit of the doubt here. And not count it wrong because it's equal correlation with type 2. So it actually does okay explaining type 8s. And then type 9s, we see again 0 to 4. So when we look at the correlations between types, really those that are doubly connected to each other, we see only 2 out of 16 or 3 out of 16 correlations that match what the Enneagram would predict. And when we look at types that are connected just through one way, whether it's just one connection through a direction of growth or strength, or sharing a wing, or having the same triad, we see 7 out of 22 and 9 out of 22. So really overall 7 out of 38 or 12 out of 38. Either way, that's very low and not what you would expect if the Enneagram is accurate. It would maybe be a little unreasonable to expect the Enneagram to get everyone exactly right. But we would expect most of them at least to be right or in the ballpark of right. And we saw that it was really nothing like that in the actual data. So ultimately, the latent profile analysis failed to support that there are 9 Enneagram types. And then looking at, I guess, more detail, that also failed to show that the 9 types from the data actually align with Enneagram types. And then looking at the correlations for the meta-analysis that I did, it also failed to support the structure of the Enneagram, which is really a fundamental aspect of the Enneagram. I'm happy to share this presentation. If you have more questions or want more information on it, please let me know. And that's it. I'm going to start posting some more videos about the Enneagram and other aspects of psychology that relate to either apologetics or Christian theology. So feel free to like and subscribe so you can get more notifications, and hopefully start doing more and better quality videos. Thank you.